Okay, so like my first video, I am going to be talking about another part of the capstone class that I'm in. So for my own project, I'm looking into the habitat for the Hawaiian feather duster in Kaneohe Bay. For this project, I worked on 3 patch reefs that are in close proximity to one another. For this project, I needed 2 other people to hold the transect line, a underwater slate to record my data, snorkel, fins, a mask, as well as this 15-meter long transect line. These are the different categories of coral coverage that I noted, like rubble, Montipora capitata, coralline algae, Parietes compressa, fungidae, as well as Poecilopora damicornis and Poecilopora mindrina. These are just the most common coral species that I noticed while snorkeling these 3 reefs. So the ecological interaction that I'm looking at for this project was the type of coral species that the Hawaiian feather dusters live near and where they choose to attach to. I was interested in that relationship and where they choose to live, and if there's any type of significance between the coral species that they are found on. That was the aspect that I was most curious about, as well as if the side of the reef changed where they reside more commonly on each patch reef, the windward side versus the leeward side. The null hypothesis would be that there is no difference in which side of the patch reef, the windward side versus leeward side, or the coral species where the feather dusters are located. The first hypothesis that I had was that feather dusters will be denser near the windward edge of the reef, and the second hypothesis that I had is that if feather dusters are present, then they will be denser near the coral species Parietes compressa. I predicted that they prefer Parietes compressa over the corals due to similar morphology between the coral structure and the microstructure of the tube itself. That the tube mimics the shape of the finger coral, the Parietes compressa. And since my prediction mentioned that the tube structure mimics the finger coral shape, it would deter from any predation because when the feather duster sucks into the tube, it looks like another branch of the Parietes compressa species, so it would deter any type of predation. That was just my prediction. To test this hypothesis/question, I used a 15-meter transect line that was 2 meters wide. I put that down on 2 spots on the windward side of the reef and 2 spots on the leeward side of the reef, making 4 transect lines per each of the 3 reefs. I then counted each feather duster that was along the transect line, as well as record what species that the feather dusters were on, as well as the general coral coverage of the transect line, so I could do a chi-squared analysis between the expected coral amounts and the observed coral. I did put in my final figures so you could see what my findings were. However, since this particular project is just talking about the hypothesis that you would want to test, I'm not going to explain what my actual findings were. If you want to know, you can come to the presentation on Friday, the 11th. But the general statement is that for the middle reef, there was a significant difference between windward and leeward side, and there were more on the windward side compared to the leeward side on the middle reef. According to the reef nomenclature in Kaneohe Bay, it was reef 15. However, for reef 16 and 14, the 2 side reefs, there was no significant difference. For the coral species hypothesis, it was correct in the sense that Parietes compressa was the most common species that the feather dusters were found on. However, when comparing the general coral coverage to my findings, it ended up being that Parietes compressa is the most dominant coral species, so it only makes sense that there was more feather dusters on Parietes compressa compared to others, since it's the most common coral type there. Anyways, this project was super fun. I wish I had more time to do more tests with it and more trials, because I think with more data I could have gotten a lot more and figure out more about the relationship with what feather dusters are like in Kaneohe Bay. So yeah, that was my project, and yeah.